Video will cover the initializing of advisories. So for schools that use an advisory type, like here in my configuration, you'll see that I have an advisory type called home base. If you're one of those schools, this video will show you how to initialize advisories and to get students scheduled into those advisories. So first off, we'll start right here on the configuration screen under settings and under the flex class configuration. So you want to define a class type, which will be your advisory class type. Some folks call it home base, some folks call it anchor class, some folks call it advisory. I'm going to call mine home base. So you need to have that as one of your class types here. It doesn't matter what order it is in. But then over to the right here, you are under the advisory class types. You are going to type in and define the same class type that you defined over here, which is going to be your advisory class type. So what this is doing is this is telling the system a couple things. Mainly what it's doing is it's going to tell the system when we initialize our classes and we want to initialize advisories, these are the types of classes we're going to initialize. But it also has some functionality around the fact if you have a planning day or something like that. Now, it is worth mentioning before we initialize advisories that if your flex block does have a planning day, you're obviously going to want to make sure that those days are correct, as with all your other days. So I would strongly suggest before any initialization of advisories or any classes, you check your in-session dates. So this being your calendar for your school. So any days that are turned off or days not in session, but also then your calendar for your flex block. So you see here, for instance, I have a pretty straightforward flex schedule where Monday is usually my planning day where only my advisory class types can meet. But there's a couple times, first time being, for instance, in October, actually maybe even September for Labor Day, where I need to move that to Tuesday or another day. So, this is covered in another video, but just to show you here, I can go in and say change planning dates and come in, for instance, and make the third a planning day. Now, at this point, I don't need to leave enable or check enable this meeting date for advisories along with these other checked boxes because I have yet to initialize my advisories or other classes. I can leave them checked though. But when I click save, you'll see that the system will make the third now a planning day. And again, I could do that if I do one more time for like October 15th, just to show you one more time. I'll make the 15th and click save. And now that is turned on as a planning day. So again, you really want to do that along with making sure that any days here, so you see any days I'm not in session, obviously I'm not running my flex block, but any days here where maybe, school is in session, but you're not going to be running flex. So maybe around midterms or something like this. So maybe this week I'm not running it. I can turn that off. But do all of that before you initialize your advisories or create any other class. After you have verified that your flex class schedule, in session date schedule is correct, you can now initialize your advisories. Now, one other thing to note before you do that is when we are initializing advisories, we're going to have the option to schedule students into those advisories, which is obviously what most schools want to do. That connection, how the system knows where to schedule the students, is based on this advisor field on each student. So in most cases, this is coming from your student information system, whether that's from a homeroom field or a class in your schedule. But before you can initialize advisories and enroll students in those advisories, this field needs to be accurate. And I should mention that, for instance, if we look at one student, you can have more than one advisor. Um, so while I only have one advisor here, you can have co-advisors. And if you do have co-advisors, the system will have the ability to deal with that when we are initializing our classes. Now I'm on the classes tab, and under the options menu, I have the option to initialize classes. And this is where I'm going to find the ability to initialize both advisories and regular classes, which will be covered in another video. When I click on Initialize Classes, the first question it's going to ask me is, what type of classes do I want to initialize? You'll see all of your types of classes as defined under configuration. The one I'm going to choose is my home base. And you'll notice here after home base, it says advisory class type. And it knows that based on the fact that back in part one of this video, we set that in my configuration. So I'm going to choose home base. It then is going to ask me, who do I want to initialize this advisory or these advisory classes for? So I can just do it for all advisors. And simply what it's going to do there is look back over at my list, on my users list, and any teacher who is listed as an advisor for a student or a co-advisor would then be given a class for a home base. I also could do it just for teachers without an advisory class. So say, for instance, you've already initialized advisories once, and now you have some new advisory teachers that came in after the fact and you want to reinitialize, but you only want to do it for those. You don't want to touch the other ones because maybe you've done some changes to those. You can do that. So I'm going to leave it for all advisors. You can name the class. Now it takes this name from the name of the class type. So you see mine said home base. But I could also say anchor or something like that. You can change that, but that's going to be the same for everyone. Now, after the fact, that after the advisory classes are created, you can go back and individually change those names or even let your teachers change those names. Set class location to teacher's preferred location if available. We do have the ability on a teacher record in MyFlexLearning to have a preferred location, a preferred room. And if you do have that set on your advisors and you check this box, not only will it create the class section, it will also put that class into that preferred room for the teacher. So you could take a moment and go do that if you haven't already, or you can always fill that in on the section after the fact. The class meeting days. Now, this is an important one. In some cases, schools will have their home base, their advisory class, not only meet on their planning day, which for me, if you remember, was Monday, or even if you don't have a planning day, but they'll have it meet every day. So if that is your case, you would just leave all the days checked or all the days that your flex block meets. If you run yours a little bit differently, your advisory, and maybe you have it only meet on Mondays, so that planning day, and then the other days, maybe you'll create a class for the teachers called flex block or something, a different type, a non-advisory type. You can just uncheck any days that it's not going to run. So if I do that, that allows me to run every day. The next checkbox says meet on cycle days, even if day was removed as a planning day. So let's say, for instance, you don't have a planning day every week. It's every other week. So say every other Monday instead of every Monday. By checking this, the system will still schedule the advisory class on the Mondays, even when it is not a planning day, when you've removed it in the calendar. Schedule students into advisory. So obviously one big thing you're going to want to be able to do is not only to schedule the classes, but schedule the students into the advisory based on who their advisor is. So when I check this, I can come in and select which days I want that for. So the nice thing about this is, say, for instance, I want the advisory or the home base to meet every day, but the advisory students only need to be scheduled in there on the planning day. So when I check that, what it's going to do is only schedule that for the Monday or whatever day that I put in there. Whereas the other days, the teacher will still have that class. There just won't be students in the roster. Now, if you do have co-advisors, you can check this box, which will also add the co-advisors as co-teachers to the advisor on that class. You can set this advisor as the student's default class. So what this will do is on the student's record on their card in MyFlexLearning, you'll now see this class, the class that the system creates and schedules them into, as their default class, which is a nice feature to have because later if you need to push all students back to their advisory, or if a class is canceled and you need students to be pushed back somewhere, they can be easily pushed back to their default class, which in this case would be their advisory. Now, once you've done this, you can go ahead and click OK. Depending on your number of advisories, this can take anywhere from a few seconds to, maybe a minute or so at most. And once done, you'll have all of your advisory sections created. And you'll see here now that my process completed. So I have 44 classes that were created. Each of these, again, was named home base anchor. If you prefer to look at it on the list view, you can do it this way also. Um, but once this is created, if you want to come in and edit or change anything, you can obviously click edit and change some things here, or click into that and then change any schedule or information here. The students, again, would be scheduled into those classes, depending on when they start.